This is Time Signatures with Jim Ervin, a podcast and radio program presented by the Capital Area Blues Society in Lansing, Michigan. Most any contemporary musical style can trace its roots back to the blues. Time Signatures explores the blues and its musical connections with captivating interviews, lively discussions, and news from the world of the blues.
You know I'm crying, baby, driving up and down these Michigan roads, yeah.
And now, here he is, your host, Jim Ervin.
Well, thank you very much, Parker, and welcome to Time Signatures. I'm your host, Jim Ervin, and we are in a very cool place this morning. We're actually recording remotely from the town of Northville, and my very special guest this morning is Wilson Lindsey. Wilson is an incredible photographer, and he has an incredible story, an equally incredible story. I'm just going to give a little back history here. Ken Settle is one of my friends on Facebook, and Ken is another incredible photographer from the Metro Detroit area, and has been shooting Bob Seger since Bob Seger was in a bar. Okay, that's how long it's been when Bob's hair was black and long. Anyway, so he occasionally puts up photographs and tells stories about the photographs, and I love his stories. But this particular post was about Wilson Lindsey, and the photograph was of Jimi Hendrix. Now, it's not just any Hendrix photograph. It is a photograph of Jimi Hendrix in Ann Arbor, well more than 2 years before he burst on the scene in the United States and really made a name for himself. So, I'm going to have to pass the mic back and forth here, and I'll direct it to you. But Wilson, welcome to Time Signatures. Glad to have you, sir.
Oh, I'm very happy to be here talking with you.
Well, it's an exciting thing for me because I'm all about the history of the blues, and we use this as our tagline: preserving the history of the blues, one story at a time. And you won't find a more bluesier cat than Jimi Hendrix. And I have to be honest with you, I didn't know that at the beginning, but I've been learning as I go along that he really made a name for himself in the UK, and it wasn't until a combination of Mick Jagger and a couple of others that said, hey, if you want us to play in the States, you're going to have to let us bring Jimmy in, and the rest is history. So I would like you to start and be as detailed as you want to be. You've got to tell the story, and we're going to have to put a link up to this so that people that come to the podcast page can check it out. Tell me the story about Jimmy in Ann Arbor. Would you do that for me?
Certainly, be happy to. I was working part-time as a photographer for the Free Press back then, and also as a musician. And I had heard a lot about Jimi Hendrix. In fact, Eric Burden had been in Detroit with the Animals doing some publicity, and he mentioned that Hendrix was beyond belief, that this man had changed the epicenter of rock blues guitar in the UK. And I was really anxious to see him as a guitarist, and hanging with a lot of other musicians. The word was out, but nobody had any recordings. And anyway,
I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second. Sure. For people that don't know, Wilson is also a musician, and your chosen genre was blues, correct?
Yes, I had a band called The Train, and we did fusion rock, but a lot of it was very much blues oriented. Okay. And we played some real good gigs back in the day, Grandy Ballroom on numerous occasions, and those were good days. And we had a lot of experimentation. Had a chance to try some different things. And the audiences in those days were pretty open to virtually anything.
Sure.
Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't on these experiments, but those were really good days and very fruitful days for a lot of musicians. But anyway, I got a call from Lorraine Alterman, who was the head entertainment writer for the Free Press, and she said that Jimmy was going to be in at this little club in Ann Arbor. And I said, "Oh yeah, I'm there." So I went there to cover the show, and I had a chance to speak with Jimmy. He was amazing from his openness, and he was happy to be there, and he talked a lot about Detroit and the music scene in Detroit at that time.
Okay.
And he was just really happy and open, happy-go-lucky, and willing to talk virtually about anything. And it was just a pleasure to interact with him. That feeling wasn't necessarily shared on my half, regarding the other members of the group. But Jimmy was wonderful. And as a result of his openness, I felt that maybe if I jumped on the stage and took some shots while they were playing, I could get...
You actually got on the stage?
Yes, sir. Okay. The stage wasn't much of a stage. It was about 2 feet tall, and it was right in the middle of the hall there at the Fifth Dimension. So I creeped onto the side of the stage, and then I worked my way towards the front, and I managed to get a perspective that you normally would not get on stage. So I think that's one of the reasons why the pictures from that particular venue have been accepted by a general audience a little bit more than your average, rock picture that we printed in the Free Press. Being able to get on the stage and literally on the same level take the pictures. And I got no negative feedback from the group, so I continued on. So some of the close-ups that I was able to get, I was very happy to do it. The camera equipment I was using was prehistoric.
Nikon, Canon, what was it?
It was a Nikon based camera back then, and of course, Tri-X film. So that's what I used. Just a stock 50 millimeter lens back then. Wow. And I had one telephoto, which was a 90 millimeter. Mm-hmm. And so those were my two go-to lenses. My first job actually was a photographer. A fellow named Johnny Doyle was a wrestling promoter, and he had the Midwest wrapped up as far as shows were concerned. His organization was called Big Time Wrestling, and he had guys like Dick the Bruiser, the Sheik, Bobo Brazil.
Yeah, I remember this.
These guys were an integral part of his organization, and I think that I just bugged him enough where he hired me at 16 to take pictures of those wrestlers. So I kind of developed a technique of shooting on stage, and without the sophisticated equipment that we have now, I was able to take a look at the lighting situation and inherently know, what could work and what didn't. it didn't work all the time because every venue was different. Sure. But I was able to get some really good pictures of the wrestling activities, and the Free Press was using some of the pictures, from those nights on their weekend editions, and they started to send me out on assignments, ask me if I wanted to do them. Sure. And the first assignment they sent me was to cover a fellow named Cassius Clay. Wow. Who was in town training and promoting a fight with Sonny Liston. And there was, for diehard old Detroiters, there was a Verner's pop factory on Woodward. Okay. And across the street was a gym that had a, full-sized ring, and that's where the boxers would be training at that particular time. And Ali, or Cassius Clay, was working there, and that was my first assignment for the Free Press. It was supposed to be just a one-day shoot. I would go there, but Ali was so nice, and his lifetime photographer was so welcoming to me as a kid there. I hung around with them as long as they were in town. I went back and I took a bunch of pictures. Wow. Just hung out, and they gave me carte blanche, to go anywhere with them, take any kind of pictures. And I was just really caught up with that situation, and of course the music aspect came along with those assignments.
That's incredible, absolutely incredible. I'm sitting here and I'm imagining, when I got started in photography, I was in high school, and I was just a kid, 16, 17 years old, and I was doing the bowling circuit and taking pictures. I never got that kind of an opportunity, but it's incredible to me, the stories that you have as a 16-year-old kid. And I want you to take me back to August 15th, 1967. Now, as I understand it, Hendrix was just a couple of months out of the Monterey Pop Festival. That was basically his inaugural introduction, I guess, to the United States. He was brought over. Was it a guest of Paul McCartney, or what? Tell me that story, and then fill me in on the evening of the 15th.
I'm not certain exactly who was the sponsorship for that particular venue or that time. He was managed by Chaz Chandler. Okay. And I believe, I know that he was the manager for them at that particular time. So whoever did the machinations for that venue or the tour, at that time, I'm not quite certain, but he had two shows on that day, and two sets, and the thing that struck me was that you could obviously tell that the place during the show was there was a lot of musicians there, because you can see in their eyes what they're looking at, mm-hmm. where the average fan would not necessarily be focused on the equipment, and they were watching his fingers. And
because this was like one of the first times, or it was the first time locally, that Hendrix had been in an audience, with an audience here in the United States, correct?
Well, he played a lot, from what I understand. He actually did.
But in the state of Michigan, I guess, is what I should have said.
He may have been there with the Isley Brothers before that. Okay. But I know that he was happy to be in Detroit with his current lineup. There's no question about that, because when he was on the Chitlin circuit back then, it was a totally different direction, and this was a drastic swerve into a different type of music. And I think that he was very much wanting to show people that this was different. This was coming from his heart and soul, and he wanted to show that what he had and what he could do. And
now, I'd been told that he also used his Flying V, introduced his Flying V in his wah-wah pedal that night. Is that correct?
if I'm not mistaken, he didn't use a V for those shows. It was strictly Strats at that particular time, and one of them was burned at that particular venue. He did his ritual burning there, and that was really different.
Okay.
So, yeah, but I didn't see the Flying V then. He may have had that at a subsequent show at the IMA Auditorium in Flint.
Okay. Now, there was also a story that while he was there, his amp blew up, and he took it off the stage and smashed it. That was part of Ken's story. Do you remember seeing that as well?
To be honest, no.
Okay.
But I'm not contradicting anyone, but it was a long time ago, and some of that those specifics can get lost and twisted in time. So it doesn't ring a bell, but I do know that the Flint show was a disaster. He was angry. He was sullen.
He shared that with you?
Yeah, I was backstage because I was covering it,
Okay.
for the paper.
Yeah.
And it was a totally different experience. I had been in the music business as a musician, and eventually it became my profession. I started to work for Motown and for some other companies after that for 25 years, and I'm used to dealing with huge egos. It doesn't bother me if they act out. And Jimmy was very snappish, and it was a little disheartening. But whatever the case is, he went out there and broke a string, and I think that was the end of the show. He stomped off after that, so it was a disaster.
You're listening to Time Signatures. I'm your host, Jim Ervin. Along with me is photographer, lots and lots of stories. Wilson Lindsey, it's so good to have you here sharing some of the stories. Now, you spent a lot of years doing photography. What was your most memorable, aside from Jimmy, because Jimmy was big, obviously. That was a big story. But aside from that night at the Fifth Dimension in Ann Arbor, is there any other big memory that you can recall from shooting any blues folks? You talked about Howlin' Wolf earlier. Let's hear about him.
I lived in the Corktown area way back then, and I knew that my landlady had known Wolf. She had, in fact, I saw her at a show at the Chessmate on Livernois way back when, and I went to see Wolf play there, and I saw her, and she was very open and wanting to chat, and she mentioned that she had known him, and then eventually when I moved down to Corktown, I rented the property that she had down there. And one night, my band was rehearsing, and during a break, I heard this knock at the door, and I went upstairs and I looked out through the glass-paned door, and I saw this huge hulking figure that I knew who it was immediately, and it was Wolf, and Hubert Sumlin was with him, and they said that they were next door, visiting Mrs. Malcantine next door, and they said they heard the band and they thought they'd come over, and I said, "Please come in, please," and we talked, and we just kind of forged a relationship, and he played in Detroit a lot. So he was there, and we had jam sessions in my basement. Those were wonderful times, but Hubert got sick, and Wolf at that particular time was on dialysis, and he was taking a job at Big Duke's. I think that was the name of the place. And he asked me if I would come in and play there for a few days, and the money was going to go to the band. And so hopped in the car with my wife and took off to Chicago. Wow. Stayed with Wolf. He was living at 88th and Cottage Grove back there in those days. And he and his wife Lily put us up, and I did the gig, until Hubert was ready to play again. Strangely enough, I came across a video on YouTube where Wolf was being interviewed at that same club. And it was a very interesting interview. It was Wolf at his most disarmed, I guess you could say.
Okay.
And but that was him. Playing with him, the band was so markedly different from the musicians that I had been playing with in my own group or playing with Detroit musicians in jam session. It was like getting on there is a slide on Belle Isle.
Okay.
That was famous for people getting on the slide, and it would go really fast, and they would fly up in the air as they were going down, and after a while it became kind of like a freak show, and people would go there knowing that they were going to be thrown into the air. And that was kind of like playing with that band. S.P. Leary was the drummer back then, and he was a powerful driving force, and when you were standing on that stage, it felt like you were on that slide, and it was propelled. You felt that push behind you, and there was a specific type of timing that you had to be aware of, and that's pretty much what I did. Tried to hang in with the program, and it was an experience that I'll never forget. It was written about, actually, that and other things about his definitive biography, which I've actually got a copy of, where the author mentions that and some other things.
Very good. Wilson Lindsey, it has been a pleasure to have you on Time Signatures. The stories are amazing. We're going to have to try to get together again and perhaps sit down and have another round. What do you think of that?
I'd love to.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. And as we tell everybody, keeping the blues alive, well, that's our goal. But preserving the history of the blues, one story at a time, is my mission. Thanks for listening. We'll look forward to seeing you next time on Time Signatures.
This has been Time Signatures with Jim Ervin, presented by the Capital Area Blues Society in Lansing, Michigan. For more information on cabs, visit capitalareablues.org. You can find this episode and past episodes at lccconnect.org. The Time Signatures theme song, Michigan Roads, is used by permission and was written by Root Doctor, featuring Freddie Cunningham.
You know I'm trying, baby, driving up and down these Michigan roads, yeah.
Until next time, keep on keeping the blues alive.
Baby, I'm home.